Welcome to episode 111 of Closer Mentality. I'm your host, Julia Mellett. I love sharing the stories behind feats of elite sport excellence. Today's guest is on a whole other level. Meet Sarah Gascon. Gascon grew up in a post-Title IX world, but the options for girls' youth sport were still few and far between. So she did what every other trailblazing little girl did. She played with the boys.
I grew up in the 80s, and this is, Title IX was maybe 10 years old at that point, and there weren't really girls' sports around when I grew up. There was t-ball, like softball, and I remember it being so boring for me and and me asking my parents if I could play baseball with the boys. And I got into sports by accident. My parents put me in sports like the rest of my siblings because they wanted us to get familiar with playing with other kids because all we did was play with each other. And so I just fell in love with sports at a very young age. I remember watching the 1984 Olympic Games and like thinking I'm going to be an Olympic athlete and play for Team USA. And my parents were like, okay, like who's this kid? And I played sports with the boys, so baseball and hockey and football and basketball. And even at recess and lunch, I was there playing with the kids. With the boys. It was so bad that my teachers or even the principal of the school was like, Sarah, you can't play with the boys all the time. You got to play with the girls. I was like that kid. And I didn't think of it as like a boys and girls thing. I just thought of it as sports and I wanted to play sports. So my whole childhood was me focused on being an athlete and wanting to play for Team USA. And as I got older, that's when I got introduced to the whole recruiting thing. And that was still very new. You did get recruited by colleges, but in the 90s, it was different. It was a different type of system. My parents didn't know anything about recruiting. I didn't know anything about recruiting. And so I got recruited very late in the game. It was the spring of my senior year, I got recruited. And I was a three-sport athlete. I was an all-state in California. I was an all-league, and I played travel ball and club volleyball. And so I had the option of playing either volleyball, basketball, or softball in college. And so I got recruited for all three of those sports in multiple colleges. And I ended up choosing Southeastern Louisiana University because they gave me the opportunity to play more than one sport. And so, my volleyball coach, I remember, she was like, yeah, of course you can play softball. And then when I get there, she's like, I really think you should reconsider, I think you should reconsider playing like more than one sport because it's like difficult to play more than one sport, especially at Division I. And, what was said to me was, you might not be as good of a volleyball player if you split your time between volleyball and softball. And then, of course, you have the demands of school as well. And so I was like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to play volleyball and I'm going to play softball. And after my freshman year for volleyball, she was like, are you sure you want to do this? You should reconsider. I was like, no, I'm going to do it. And so I ended up playing softball as well. And that year I ended up making all conference in softball as a freshman. And my volleyball coach was like, I didn't realize you were that good in softball too. And I was like, well, it was like a weird experience because, female athletes, especially, they didn't really play more than one sport than their sport that they wanted to play. And of course, the conversations that I had with coaches in high school, they're like, you're not going to play more than one sport in college, so you better like pick a sport now. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I've been a multi-sport athlete my whole life, and I'm going to keep doing that.
Early sports specialization was not even a piece of the athlete experience that Gascon entertained.
The thing that helped me, and you talked about specialization, I didn't specialize at an early age. So if my brother was going to play street hockey, I was going to go play street hockey with him. If I wanted to go and play tennis with my dad, I was going to go and play tennis with my dad. I didn't specialize in a sport. And I think because I didn't specialize in a sport and then didn't pick a sport later in my high school days, I think that translated into how successful I was at the college level and at the Team USA level. I think it allowed me an opportunity to really excel and do things on a field or on a court that maybe some other athletes couldn't do, just because, not because they weren't athletic enough, it's just because I had other skills that I had developed over the years that allowed my body to do certain things that were a little bit different.
Southeastern Louisiana embraced her as a third baseman and a libero. Defensively minded, Gascon credits that come from behind holding down the fort mentality to a childhood of competition with rougher boys. Gascon's college playing career in softball, volleyball, and in her final season as the women's soccer team's goalkeeper skyrocketed her to the forefront of the female sport conversation. She was nationally recognized by Team USA Volleyball, but what she failed to realize was that she'd soon end up on not one, not two, but 3 national team rosters.
My junior year of college volleyball, I was ranked number 1 in the country in digs. And I went to volleyball tryouts for USA at the end of the Final Four. So that was December of 2001. And or maybe it was 2002, I can't remember now. But I ended up doing really well at that tryout and making the USA volleyball team, one of their collegiate teams. So I get the email in January of, I guess it was '02, or maybe, yeah, it was '02. And they said, oh, congratulations, you made the USA volleyball team. Like, you're going to go to the Czech Republic in the summer. And I was just starting baseball or softball season. And so I finished softball season, went to the Czech Republic. I guess this is '03. Going into my senior year of volleyball for '03, was ranked number 1 again in the country for digs, and then was finishing up my softball season. So I finished volleyball. I didn't make the Olympic team for '04. Was going into softball, get an email from USA Baseball about the women's national baseball team that they're starting, inaugural team to go to world championships. Finished my softball season, tried out for USA Baseball, made the world championship team, and I still had school to do. So I still had a whole another semester. My senior year for softball, I probably had my worst year, I would say, in softball. And even though I was still an all-conference player, it was probably the hardest year I had. And it was kind of one of those things. I didn't know about soccer, obviously, at this point, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, like my college career is done. What am I going to do? And I want to play for Team USA, but how do I do it? And what sport do I pick? And, when you play for Team USA, you're competing against the 1% of the 1% in the entire United States of female athletes. So like even playing for USA Volleyball, like I was on one of their teams and they had, 5 teams or 6 teams at that point. So even like being on the team was an honor, but climbing that ladder and trying to compete and beat out some of these other amazing women volleyball players it almost feels like it's impossible. But anyway, when I received the email from USA Baseball, I was like, I like called my dad right away and I was like, Dad, I got this email from USA Baseball, like we got to go to tryouts. And I went to the very last tryout, which was held at Northwestern University. And my dad went with me, and allegedly it was the best tryout for the staff to see. I was with, I don't know if people remember this, but the Silver Bullets from the '90s. And that was the all women's professional baseball team. They were sponsored by Coors Light. They kind of did barnstorming and played minor league teams or men's baseball teams. And I remember watching them on TV as a little girl, wanting to be them. And so I show up to this tryout and they're there. Like some of those athletes are there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the Silver Bullets are here. And I like remember telling my dad, the Silver Bullets are here. Not only that, we had All-American girls from the 1940s and 50s baseball league. We had those women there as well. So you have this like generation of women baseball players that participated in baseball during World War II. And you're like awestruck by them. Then I had the Silver Bullets that I was actually competing with to play on the national team. And then you had this incredible coaching staff as well that were major league managers or coaches. I thought I had a terrible tryout, but I ended up making the first cut. So that was the top 30 athletes in the country. I ended up making the top 30. We went to a final tryout in Massachusetts, and from there, they're only picking 18. I didn't know if I was going to make the team or not because there were so many incredible women there that I know that I gave myself the best opportunity to make the team, but you just never knew. And so, anyway, a few weeks later, the manager calls me and congratulates me and tells me that I made the team, and my name's on the website. And then he ended up talking to my dad as well, because I was in Louisiana still at the time, and he ended up calling my house in California. And so anyway, my dad ended up talking to him and was, of course, like super proud of me. And it was just an incredible experience. So from there, like at tryouts, you got the call a few weeks later, and then they had tournaments set up. So we kind of did a little barnstorming thing. The first thing that we did was we flew to Japan and played in the World Series. We came in second place. Japan beat us. And then we flew back to the States. We're training in Massachusetts still. And then we were barnstorming with Canada. So at the end of the barnstorming series that we had with Canada, we were playing in the World Championships in Edmonton. And of course, like big stage. And we ended up making it to the gold medal game, playing Japan again, who we just played a month prior. And we ended up beating them in World Championships. So again, it was just like this incredible, it felt like a dream to me. It was like a dream come true. The first thing you do is you get your white uniform and you put it on and you stare at yourself and it says, big USA across your chest. And you're just like, oh my God, like you can't help it. You get like super emotional about it. And, and then you have this incredible group of women that you get to play with. So some of them were silver bullets. Some of them were the New England girls or women that played in a league. And, I just texted them yesterday. We're just reminiscing about what an incredible experience we had. It's 20 years ago. And, I still like, it's one of my favorite teams that I've ever been a part of. And I love them forever. But also like, yeah, it was like just a dream come true for me.
If you're counting, you'll find that Gascon only mentioned making 2 national teams. The third, a complete unknown. While pursuing a master's degree in kinesiology at Penn State, Gascon was reunited with USA Team Handball, a sport reminiscent of all the ones she was already making national teams with.
Handball specifically, I always say, thank God I played multiple sports and thank God I played with the boys because handball is such an aggressive sport. It's like it is very defensive or physical. And you have to have that mentality where that switch has to flip. It's not an easy sport for sure, but it also has all of these elements and components that I played. So there's blocking like in volleyball, there's throwing or shooting like in baseball or in volleyball, the same motion. There's dribbling like in basketball, basketball defense, very similar. Posting up like a post player. So all these different skills and elements. And then of course, being a student of the game, I think is the most underrated part of being an athlete. You have to study nonstop. And it's not just studying your own play, it's also studying your opponent or other players, the way they play, the way they analyze, listening to coaches, getting coaching from other coaches, and just taking a little piece from everybody and then making it your own. So I think that there's a lot of different aspects to performing at an elite level and being prepared. And I think the easier part is physically preparing yourself, although it's very difficult, but it's much more challenging, difficult to mentally prepare or cognitively prepare for competition and playing at that elite level, especially in other countries, because it could get pretty interesting sometimes with the crowds. I ended up playing USA Baseball and USA Team Handball for about 8 years together. And I wouldn't say it was easy. It's not easy, but I was able to do it because I've always been a multi-sport athlete. So I was playing on both of those national teams at the same time. I ended up finishing up my baseball career in 2011 and then have just been playing handball since then. But yeah, my goal is always to be to play at the highest level possible, which is both baseball and handball have provided me those opportunities. So I'm very grateful for them.
USA Team Handball extended her playing career post-collegiately for more than a decade, during which time she had a front row seat to the impact of extended women's sport opportunities.
And then a couple years later, we get this invite from Auburn University that they want to be our residency home for USA Team Handball. And so I moved in January of 2014, and I was like, I think it'd be a great idea for me to like earn my PhD at Auburn. And so I applied to earn my PhD there. And our director, Dr. Mary Rudisell, she's like, listen, you're like a hybrid. I don't know where you fit. Like you have a lot of different interests and you're like good in these areas. And I did biomechanics at Penn State and learned how to run a lab there. And she's like, why don't you talk to the biomechanist that we have? And that was Dr. Wendy Weimer and Dr. Gretchen Oliver. And so I ended up being in Dr. Oliver's lab in the sports medicine and movement lab. And we focused on upper extremity, specifically overhead throwing in baseball, softball. And then because we had handball there, we added handball. And so I did my doctoral studies at Auburn University in the School of Kinesiology. And what I love about the School of Kinesiology is that they appreciated my uniqueness. So they didn't try to put me in a box. They're just like, okay, what is your interest? What do you think you want to specialize in? Let's just go from there. And so they gave me an opportunity to kind of venture out and create my own thing, which was I wanted to look at female athletes' overhead throwing performance with specific apparel on. And so I went down that avenue, created a performance apparel shirt, and that ended up being my dissertation, and found that there was statistical significance in improving your throw and posture. So it was fun. It was like a really, really awesome, fun time. I had a really great time at Auburn and completing my PhD.
At 39 years old, while her peers were building families and following traditional paths, Gascon was solely focused on making the Olympic team.
You know, at that point, you're realizing you understand the definition of father time. At that point, you know, I'm in my 30s, and most women, female athletes in their 30s there's only, you know, you could probably count on two hands how many female athletes in their 30s there are that continue on with either Team USA or in a professional league. I think you have a little bit more now just because we're finding the research and data that's out there that women actually peak. They have their athletic peak in their mid to late 30s. So, you know, you're finding more female athletes playing into their 30s. But at that time, it was, you know, like I want to keep playing and I love playing and I could still play and I could still play at a high level. And, you know, you're ramping up for the Rio Games. And Brazil has, the way the Olympics work is the host country, they have to participate in all the sports. So they get automatic bids for all the sports. So Brazil had an automatic bid in handball to participate in their country. So that was a great opportunity for us to hopefully medal at the Pan Am Games, at least get into the gold medal game if we're playing Brazil, and then go to a second chance Olympic qualifying tournament to qualify for the Olympics. Well, unfortunately, we didn't qualify for the Pan Am Games, and that means that the entire 2016 year, it's basically a wash. You basically have to start all over, start a quad, Olympic quad all over. And so that's like really heartbreaking because I had been trying to go to the Olympics since '04, and that had always been my dream and goal. And, you know, the main focus for me is that I felt like, man, we play really well. We have really great athletes. We need a little bit more time. And so the running joke with my teammates, I was like, just give me 10 years. Like in 10 years, you're going to be amazing and phenomenal. And we could be unstoppable. But, you know, life happens. And with female athletes, we're a little different, right? We want to get married. Some of us want to get married. Some of us want to have kids. Some of us want to keep playing sports. Some of us want to keep doing everything, being a mom, a wife, and being an athlete. So we have different priorities compared to male athletes. And so there's other things that we have to think about as females. And, when you're in your 30s, the clock is ticking both on your athletic career and if you want to have a family. So, those things they have to be considered, I think, when you're making these decisions in life that are important. But I think my mindset at the time was I'm here. I'm like doing my PhD. I'm gonna be serious. I'm gonna train full time. I'm gonna be here every day, and I'm gonna act as the captain of the women's national team and lead by example. So it was struggling. We had a hard time for that period of time specifically because a lot of our athletes ended up leaving. A lot of our really great athletes ended up leaving and doing other things. They either went overseas or they went back home and needed to work because it's difficult. We don't get paid. We don't have sponsorship by our national governing body or the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. We don't have any money. So we have to either go to school full time, we have to work full time, and then we have to train full time. So, it's a different kind of animal that we have to deal with when we're training at this level.
The next quad, USA Team Handball, saw Tokyo 2020 as a feasible goal. The team had a fresh roster, and Gascon was more than happy to lead the group into Japan.
It was just the mindset of, like, we have this opportunity to go to Japan. Let's go all in. And we ended up recruiting more athletes and keeping a good core group of athletes from our women's national team during that quad. And that was probably the best quad I've ever been a part of in my tenure with USA Team Handball. We had some incredible players that played professionally in Europe, and then we had a really strong home base here in Auburn. And we were locked in, ready to go. We ended up playing in the Pan Am Games, and unfortunately, we didn't play in the gold medal game. We played in the bronze medal game, though, which is the best we've ever done in Pan Am Games since the 90s, which I think 95 was the last time we medaled in the Pan Am Games for the women's national team. So we were in the medal game, and we ended up losing to Cuba by 1 goal, but it was an incredible experience. And then, of course, the pandemic hits. And so, then the athletes are waiting an extra year. And that's brutal. That is brutal because you're getting ramped up to peak at the right time. The planning is different. So I don't know about the individual sports, but I know for team sports like team handball, my coach did an excellent job. What he used to do before every quad is plan out the entire quad. So it didn't necessarily mean that the schedule was going to be exact, but it was pretty close. And what he would do is he would have international events or training camps on specific periods of time. And so we would try to do an international event at least one every quarter. And then we would try to do a domestic training once or twice in each quarter. And so there was athletes that were here at Auburn. We were training every day, 2 times a day. So I would train, and I was acting as the player coach during that time. So we would have strength and conditioning in the morning and then practice in the evening, or we would have practice in the morning and then, something in the evening. And we would do that Monday through Friday. And I worked really well with our strength and conditioning coach. We're actually really good friends, Dr. Cody Hahn. And he's actually still my strength and conditioning coach now. But, it was about turning the dial up and turning the other dial down. So when he wanted to ramp up or do hypertrophy blocks for us in our strength training, then that means I would have to ramp down some of the training for handball. So we would do a little bit slower pace, more skill stuff, because you're accumulating fatigue over a period of time on purpose. And then when we started shifting the graph, I should say, to more of a strength power, and then power, that's when we were getting closer to tournament time. So when we shifted that graph and focused on that type of strength training, or I should say strength and conditioning training, then I could dial it up a little bit more at practice. That means we were almost like full go, full speed, maybe not like scrimmaging, but maybe doing some scrimmages during those periods of time, like short scrimmages, maybe like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, but not a full game. You have to be really careful when it comes to training because your number one priority is to make sure that the health and well-being of the athlete is priority number one with whether they're in the weight room, we're doing conditioning, we're practicing. You want to make sure that they are healthy enough to participate in those different practices. And then the other aspect of it is you have to be sensitive to us as athletes. We have to work full time, or I'm in the lab full time, or I have to teach full time, or people have to go to school full time. So like there's all these other components to recovery that you have to take into consideration. So I would be very cautious with my teammates that were here. And I would ask them all the time, like, what is your fatigue level? How are you today? There would be some practices. It'll be funny if my coach listens to this, but there'll be some practices that I'm like, okay, give me kind of a 1 through 10. How are you from a fatigue standpoint? And there were days where my teammates and we're in the red, we're like 8, 9, 10. We're in the red for sure. And I would say, all right, let's just go up the street to Chipotle and have a good dinner. And then, let's get out of here, like moments like that happen because you have to take into consideration, all right, we need a little bit more recovery time. The point is not, this is the one practice that's going to make us or break us. It's what you do with the athletes that you have and how are we as a team, because we have to peak at the Pan Am Games or at World Championships or at the Olympic Games. And so you're preparing for this one event in 4 years. And so all of these days accumulated have to be considered. You take the micro aspect of training and then you build it out. But it's very difficult. I'm sure individual sport athletes had a challenging time as well. And also the other aspect is you're used to playing all the time. You're used to being on a schedule and in a system. And during that COVID year, nobody could play, nobody could travel, nobody could do anything. And so we had to come up with really unique ways of training on our own, especially since some people in some states, like they weren't even allowed to go outside, or they weren't even allowed to be in a gym with other people. So you had to be like really creative and unique. In Alabama, it was a little different. We actually, we didn't really wear masks and we were able to go into the gym. It was just, how are you going to exercise and be cautious with your health and everybody else's health?
Unfortunately, Gascon and the team failed to qualify for Tokyo 2020. After missing out on Rio 2016, and then again ahead of Tokyo 2020, Gascon was seriously reconsidering her athletic path. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless of if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human in this world going through a hard time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a positive way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. This is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options just in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. If this sounds like something that could help you, there's a link in the show notes to get you started on your therapy journey. It's betterhelp.com/closer mentality. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Because finding a therapist is a little like dating. If you don't really fit with the therapist matched with you, it's easy and free to switch therapists without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/closer mentality. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/closer mentality. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this channel. Did you know that you can purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore? With Libro FM, you can pick from more than 325,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from real booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, you know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports your local community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to squeeze more reading into your busy life. Listen with the free Libro FM app while you do chores, walk the dog, or relax at home. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations from the people who know best, booksellers. Closer Mentality has partnered with Libro FM on a special offer. Through the link in the show notes, you can get 2 audiobooks on Libro FM for the price of 1. Offer only valid for new members in Canada and the US. Thanks to Libro FM for sponsoring this podcast. As it turned out, Gascon would end up a member of the US Olympic and Paralympic team for a very different reason. While she was training in residency at Auburn University, one of her fellow doctoral classmates and Olympians, Dr. Ford Dyke, offered a unique opportunity to stay involved. Come on as an assistant coach for the newly formed USA Wheelchair Handball team, operating out of Auburn University. Dr. Dyke was focused on bringing the sport that he loved to the adaptive community, and he couldn't think of a more perfect person to coax that mission into existence.
Long story short, a couple days later, he's like, no, I'm for real. Like, can you be a part of the staff? Like, can you be an assistant coach? That was the first conversation. And it was him and Rita Clanton, who's a 84 Olympian, and she was a 3-sport athlete here at Auburn. And I met her 10 years ago. She was part of the reason why we're here at Auburn. But she lives here in, we have Auburn and Opelika. She lives in Opelika. She's from Opelika, and she teaches at Auburn University as well. So the 3 of us taught together when Ford and I were doing our doctoral program here. And then he asked her to be his assistant coach. And then he talked to her about adding me. And she's like, yeah, of course we need to bring the band back together, right? And so anyway, he's like, Sarah, I really need help with like the logistical aspects of it. And so I kind of operate as like the GM or director of operations. My title with the International Handball Federation would be like a team leader. But I basically handled all the logistical aspects of the team traveling, getting visas, making sure their passports are updated, make sure they have safe sport, all of these like little things that have to be done, and they have to be done on a certain timeline. And then I also assisted Ford with, helping him with drills or, any space that he needed me to help him in, I was there to help him. And that's kind of, when I reflect on it, that's who I am as a person. I'm somebody who is very comfortable wearing multiple hats. I'm very comfortable if the room is on fire. Like, I'm like totally fine with chaos and then organizing it, because I'm like a very task-oriented person. So I organize things and I compartmentalize and I put them in like certain boxes. And, it's like, if a task needs to be done, I'm getting it done. And I'm going to nag people until I get answers, like I could do those things. And so I'm kind of a jack of all trades, which is exactly who I was and am as an athlete, kind of a jack of all trades. And I have a lot of skills that I think that I learned over the course of my life, both academically and athletically, that I'm able to contribute in a different way now.
Gascon works specifically with the disabled population on a sport that she excelled at able-bodied, which places her in a unique position that requires, as she's learned, a fair amount of self-awareness.
Part of it is a little give and take and listening on both ends. So the athletes have to listen to us, but then we also have to listen to the athletes. The athletes have a different perspective. And they also, some of them are like, well, you don't know, you're not in a wheelchair, Sarah. And I'm like, you're right, absolutely right. So like, we're asking you to do things that of course we can do because we're able-bodied, but you guys can't do because you're adaptive. And so anyway, there was a couple times where I actually got in a chair. And so they were telling me certain things. And I was like, well, let me see how I move and how I position myself or how I throw. And so I think that they appreciated that I was willing to take the time to do that. and like just get a different perspective. The other thing is there was a lot of collaboration with our coaching staff. So our staff was very open and willing to admit that they didn't know everything that the athletes were experiencing. And so there were times where it was just a listening session for us, for the coaching staff, where we had to listen to their perspective or listen to maybe something that they wanted to do or adjust. And then we modified some of like the defensive tactics or the offensive tactics for their skill set and our overall plan. So there was a lot of, I remember this one particular practice. This was before we played Chile in our playoff. It was about a defensive position. And so one athlete was saying, well, I would position myself like this, and here's what you could do. And he was kind of navigating. And then that's when I stepped in. I'm like, I actually wouldn't do that. And here's why. And so I gave my perspective as, you know, an able-bodied handball player and like what you're going to see on the court and how they're going to move. And I always said to them, like, here's how I would beat you right now with the positioning that you're in. And I think that having those open conversations really helped both on our end and their end. And I think that's where you feel, I wish I could have bottled up how special this team was, because I want everybody to experience this. And I think that's where you have that mutual respect of the athletes and the coaching staff with one another. And then we just had a good time. I have been around Paralympic athletes before, training at the Olympic training centers, and I'm friends with several of them. And, but I've never worked with them and I've never played with them. And so working with them and introducing them to this sport and this game that I love was awesome, an awesome opportunity. And, you know, I talked to you about my 2004 team, and I can say this is probably one of the best sports experiences I've ever had in my life. Working with these athletes and my staff. I mean, it was just, I laughed so much when we were not on the court. You know, I was cracking up laughing with my staff at the mealtime or busting chops with some of the athletes, and they were busting our chops. You know, it was just like such a good time and a great experience.
The USA Wheelchair Handball team is comprised of athletes from sports like wheelchair tennis, wheelchair rugby, and wheelchair basketball.
What makes them so incredible is that they're able to play multiple sports and play them well. And the other thing is that what's inspiring too is that they try it and they don't care if they're bad. They like participating and they want to participate and they do want to be good at the sport. But that's what's, to me, I'm like, golly, I wish that more athletes could learn from our adaptive athletes. These athletes, they go all in. It's 0 to 100. They go all in and they want to learn and they listen. And, you know, I wouldn't say that it was an easy road for us, for sure. I mean, there was multiple practices where we were like, just stop and listen to us for a moment. Just listen. Once they listened and then we compared it to some other sport that they did, that's when you started seeing them be like, oh, okay. And so they figured out like these elements of handball, wheelchair handball. And they took a little bit of wheelchair basketball or a little bit of wheelchair football or rugby, and they added it to handball and they made it their own. And that was, Rita would say that, like, we're going to play this sport the way that Americans should play this sport. We're not going to play it in a way where Europeans or South Americans or Asians play the sport. We're making this an American sport. And that's something that, you know, unfortunately we have all learned how to play handball based off of more of a European style of handball. But what we wanted to do was make this more American. And that's, I think, what we did. And I think that's why we were successful.
Gascon says that the roster was thrown straight into the fire when, mere months after fielding it, Dr. Dykes sent the organization to the 2024 Third International Handball Federation's World Championship in Cairo, Egypt. This marked the team's first international competition, as well as most of its players' first handball tournament ever. Unbelievably, The US squad ended its Egyptian tournament with a silver medal, falling only to the hosts.
We were in Egypt. I've never been to Egypt before. And so we had 7 other countries there and met amazing people and watched these unreal athletes. Like these men and women, the way that they move on a court or how they play and how they manipulate their bodies or their chair skills. It was the most impressive thing I think I've ever experienced before. And our athletes, they had just learned how to play wheelchair handball in like a 2-month period of time. So that was even more impressive. And people were shocked. Like everybody, not only in our country, but around the world, they were just shocked that we came home with a silver medal. We were in the gold medal game. But, to Ford and Jency's credit, they laid out a timeline. And at the end of the timeline, the very last thing says, go home with a gold. And that was always our mission. And I think in sports, when you have a clear vision and clear mission and you put it on paper and you organize it in a way where it makes sense to you and then you execute it, when you have that game plan and you execute it, great things happen. And that's what happened with us, is that we had an incredible group of athletes, an incredible staff, and we just stuck to the plan and it was unbelievable. And then the other important part of it is we had a fundraise like crazy. We needed to raise at least $75,000. We actually exceeded that, but we really didn't want our athletes to fundraise. We wanted to do it as a staff. We wanted to find sponsors and donors, and that's exactly what we did. We wanted our athletes literally just to show up and perform and be in their ideal performance state. And that's what I think that we did a pretty good job of that. But, we wanted to isolate them from all the noise and the nonsense that occurs. We wanted them to stay out of the fundraising. We just wanted them to physically, mentally, and emotionally prepare themselves. So when you talk about, burnout or like how you prepare mentally and emotionally, I think because we were so athlete centric and all of us on the staff were athletes. We had 2 others, Lisa Egan, who's a 96 Olympic athlete for handball, and then Eric Finch, who played on the men's national team with Ford. All of us were really focused on what do the athletes need and what do we need to do to help the athletes prepare the best that they possibly can. So I think because our staff had that mindset, very athlete centric, we were able to create an environment of success for them.
Are you an athlete rehabbing from an injury? Are you a coach or athletic trainer seeking additional support for your injured athlete toolkits? KT Tape has exactly what you need. KT Tape is a rehabilitation tape that helps stabilize and compress sensitive areas of the body during exercise. Apply KT Tape to an area either in pain or in recovery and feel the difference. KT Tape is comfortable, stable, and long-wearing. There's tape for all modes of action, from gentle, which is safe for easy activity and everyday use, to pro extreme, for athletes in moderate to high-impact exercise. KT Tape makes water-resistant tape as well for a more adaptable rehabilitation implementation. KT Tape caters to lifelong athletes and focuses on reducing muscle soreness for all users when worn during exercise and up to 48 hours post. Are you an athlete in need of prescription sports goggles or sunglasses? Today's final sponsor may have just the solution for you. A Sight for Sport Eyes was created when founder Shannon Knight saw a niche that was perpetually going unfulfilled. A Sight for Sport Eyes grew out of a need for education surrounding the impact of sport-related eye injuries and their lasting repercussions. A Sight for Sport Eyes runs like a regular optical practice, not an e-commerce store. Their goal is to give you the same high-quality service and name-brand lenses made by the best optical laboratories in the country, geared specifically for athletes and athletic use cases. If you need new lenses or frames, A Sight for Sport Eyes is the perfect place to get them. The links to BetterHelp.com, Libro FM, KT Tape, and A Sight for Sport Eyes are all in the show notes. Now, let's get back to the episode. Now that the precedent has been set, Gascon says that all eyes are turned to the USA's trip to Lyon, France this summer for Euro Hands for All, a European-based tournament. USA training camp begins on May 23rd, and travel to the tournament is slated for 2 weeks later. Quick turnarounds are what this team has become known for, and Gascon is excited to continue along on this journey. You can follow Sarah and Team USA's adventures at the links in the show notes. You can also watch she and I's full interview at the Closer Mentality Uncensored YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning into episode 111 of Closer Mentality. As always, I'm your host, Julia Mellett. See you next week.